The trial has begun. The prosecution has given its opening statement while the defense is in the middle delivering its own. But right now, here with me to break down what has already been said and to compare both sides are former Drew Peterson trial judge and in-session contributor, Judge Stephen White, and criminal defense attorney Rebecca Nitkin. Judge White, you know, when you look at this case on its face, there are so many facts that provide an uphill battle for the defense. I mean, an intent to kill you could find from these facts. Premeditation, buying a gun when he'd never owned a gun, going to Rusty Snyderman's home in a certain disguise, but oops, Rusty Snyderman sees him, so he has to leave and change the disguise to another disguise. I want you to listen to a little bit of this opening statement today from Prosecutor Don Geary as he described how Hemy Neuman killed Rusty Snyderman before leaving the scene. I want to get your thoughts. Let's listen.
As Rusty walks to his car, the defendant approaches him, walking toward him, pulls his gun, and he shoots him 3 times. Here, here, and here. He walks up, and at contact or near contact, puts that .40 caliber hollow point to Rusty's neck, to his jugular. Fires one last time. And then this man who didn't know the difference between right and wrong goes to his van and drives off quickly to be lost in morning rush hour traffic.
All right, Judge White, we see the grieving widow, Andrea Snyderman, there in the gallery. Now, I want to ask you, in all seriousness, is part of this defense going to be that this woman drove him nuts, that this woman drove the defendant insane, and that's one reason he killed her husband?
Well, it's certainly going to be part of it, as the defense pointed out, you know, with his childhood and everything else in their part of their opening there. They're certainly going to try to bring her in, and like I said, it'll kind of be the portrayal of this volcano sitting there rather dormant, and then something let it out so that it would erupt, and that cause for that eruption was her. I'll be curious to see, you know, at some point if they ever get a juror, to see whether or not they thought that cry was a sincere cry as he was discussing, you know, how her husband was shot. Because from this aspect, you know, I would assume some people could think that it was a rather phony cry kind of put on. So. And
it's a good question.
But
where
they
was
have
she
to use
seated?
her. They definitely have to bring her.
Where was she seated for the jury to see her or not see her? Good point. Rebecca Nitkin, you know, right. I think it's very tragic, the defendant's life in many respects. His family at a concentration camp, most of them killed. He then virtually abandoned, put at a boarding school, didn't have any place to go, on and on. I mean, his life has very many trials and tribulations, but so do many people's lives. And is that enough to connect it to this situation, and he doesn't know right from wrong when he pulls a trigger of a gun that he bought and he'd never owned a gun before in his life?
It's exactly what I was thinking. You know, everybody in that jury has suffered unbelievable losses. What human being hasn't? And he did go to Israel, but look how well he did in Israel. And when you were talking about college, what student hasn't had a depressing semester, but he ended up Dean's List? You know, so, but they had to go back and try to lay the platform, which we talked about originally in the beginning. And then you talk about the manic highs, because we have to lay the platform for bipolar disorder. He spent a ton of money, and he bought diamonds, and he went on vacations. I don't think that's going to sit very well with the jury, and the ramifications of his actions are that he's losing his home. In today's society, how many people are losing their homes? So I think that the key is it's going to be an epic battle between all of the health experts, and obviously they're going to say that he was insane. And so it's all going to come down to, they have to get into his head and what happened with Andrea. The other thing, they did say that he was suicidal, but he didn't want to commit suicide because of the children. And that raised a little bit of a flag, which made me think he was more sane than insane. But you have depressed, losing the home, in trouble with the business, and then there's this Andrea. And he falls madly in love with Andrea. Andrea, and it falls into the obsessive category. And he's telling her, I love you, I want to marry you. Any sane woman would get the red flag and get the heck out of there. She didn't. She got very much involved and started pulling all of the chains, and this is what they're going to have to see. She has sex with him, and there's no way she did not have sex with him. What is she repenting for? Then she pushes
you know,
him
Rebecca,
away.
what makes this case different, because everybody goes through things in life, but I think what the defense is honing in on is that what makes this case different is Andrea Snyderman and what she did to the defendant.
Right.
You know, let's listen to the prosecutor, Don Geary,
Right.
because he focused his attention on the differing stories of Andrea Snyderman and Hemy Neuman. One says there absolutely wasn't an affair between them, while the other isn't quite sure what to believe.
Andrea will tell you, you'll hear from her, that the defendant made a pass at her.
Now, you know, defense attorney Doug Peters, he began his opening statements conceding that Hemy Neuman killed Rusty Snyderman. I mean, that's not an issue in this case, and that he destroyed many lives.
On November the 18th, 2010, Hemy Neuman shot and killed Rusty Snyderman. And on that day, the lives of those two men, the lives of their families, their hopes, their dreams, and their futures were shattered in broken pieces on the ground that could never be put back together again.
Judge White, I want to ask you, insanity is a very difficult affirmative defense. And what, in your experience, because you have so much vast experience, besides the obvious, when does the defense decide that they are going to give notice of the affirmative defense of insanity? What makes them decide that? And I'm saying disregard the obvious here, because if you have delusions and Olivia Newton-John is coming to you and telling you to do this, I mean, I think it's obvious. But what makes you go that route when it's so difficult?
Well, part of it is when do those delusions occur? Have they just surfaced after he's been caught, you know, and arrested, and then starts to talk to the psychiatrist? Now, some of the rest of it with the bipolar disorder, the you know, the family history, the short depression moods that were there. Those are all things that are pre the murder, or the you know, when he killed Rusty. It is, as a defense attorney, and as you watch them, they sit there and they say, well, let's look at the offense first. You know, do we have a valid defense for this particular incident, or can they prove it? Can you show that they can't prove it beyond a reasonable doubt? And in this particular case, it appears that the state has a rock-solid case with regards to the actual shooting, at least from the opening statements, and the defense is conceding that. So then you go to your next thing. If you have those depressions, if you have those mental disorders or those mood swings, you know, can you get, you know, if you have a psychiatrist that can indicate that he did not appreciate and know the difference between right and wrong, then you have to go with that insanity defense. And again, now what's made the insanity defense even more difficult is that verdict form of guilty but mentally ill, because most jurors are not instructed that guilty but mentally ill, the person gets sentenced just as if they were killed, or just as if they were convicted of murder. You know, it's the treatment aspect after they're convicted and go to the Department of Corrections, and most of them are unaware of that. Most people think that not guilty by reason of insanity. A lot of people know, you know, that he's not going to go to prison, that he could get out in a relatively short period of time. So the guilty but mentally ill is a real huge hurdle for the defense, and makes that insanity defense even harder to sell, because the jury can think, well, you know, he really wasn't all that insane, but he definitely does have mental problems, and that way he just gets sentenced like a normal murder, you know, for time.
Right, and I think it also can be extremely important that there is some empathy, because as we're hearing about the story of this defendant, I mean, you have some emotions. It's sad, much of his life, and also with Andrea. All right, thank you so much to all of our guests. The Honorable Stephen White joining us from Joliet, Illinois, and Rebecca Nitkin, defense attorney extraordinaire. Thank you to both of you. We'll be right back with more of In Session. And you can't wait for our special on Drew Peterson.